Deep in the quiet English countryside of Buckinghamshire, there stands a structure that looks less like a house and more like a ghost made of stone. It rises from the landscape not as a ruined medieval fortress, but as a palace of immense, breathtaking proportions. It possesses grand walls, soaring towers that pierce the skyline, and windows that once looked in on the most valuable private art collection the world has ever seen. This is Mentmore Towers. Today, even though the property is valued at an eye-watering £200 million, it stands rotting. Its grand windows are boarded up, hiding the darkness within. The roof leaks, allowing the rain to weep into the historic interiors. The halls, once filled with the laughter of kings and the whispers of prime ministers, are now silent. To understand how a residence built by the wealthiest family in history, the legendary Rothschilds, could become an abandoned shell, we must look past the crumbling bricks and mortar. The story of Mentmore is not just about architecture. It is a century-long tragedy of ambition, social prejudice, overwhelming grief, and a catastrophic failure to protect our history. Chapter 1. The Outsider's Dream. To understand the end, we must go back to the beginning, to the mid-19th century and a man who had everything, yet belonged nowhere. Baron Mayer de Rothschild was born into a banking dynasty that controlled the flow of money across the globe. They financed wars, they built railroads, and they shaped nations. However, in the rigid, unyielding hierarchy of Victorian England, money was not enough. The old aristocracy, families who could trace their bloodlines back to the Norman conquest, looked down on the Rothschilds. To them, this banking family was new money, and perhaps more significantly in the prejudiced eyes of that era, they were Jewish. But Mayer was not a man to hide in the shadows. He was an aesthete, a man who preferred the thundering hooves of racehorses and the brushstrokes of fine art to the dusty ledgers of banking halls. He decided that if British society would not fully welcome him, he would build a world so magnificent, so undeniable, that they could not ignore him. He envisioned a palace that would serve as a shield for his family, a declaration of their arrival. To realize this dream, Mayer made a shocking choice. He did not hire a traditional architect from the Royal Academy. Instead, he hired Joseph Paxton. Paxton was a gardener, but he was no ordinary gardener. He was the genius behind the Crystal Palace. His expertise lay in greenhouses, light, and glass. This gamble resulted in a masterpiece. Completed in the 1850s, Mentmore was a fusion of traditional Jacobean stone and futuristic technology. Its crowning glory was the Grand Hall, a massive central courtyard covered by a gigantic glass roof. It was a palace of light, filled with sunshine, exotic tropical plants, and a collection of art so vast and so rare, it was dubbed the Private Louvre. Chapter 2. The Union of Power. Mayer died in 1874, leaving this colossal estate to his only child, Hannah. At just 23 years old, Hannah de Rothschild became the wealthiest heiress in all of Europe. The house, designed by her father to be a fortress against prejudice, now became a golden cage for a lonely young woman. However, Mentmore's purpose shifted again with the arrival of a suitor, Archibald Primrose, the 5th Earl of Rosebery. Handsome, intelligent, and fiercely ambitious, Archibald represented the very peak of the British aristocracy, the same class that had once shunned Hannah's father. His marriage to Hannah in 1878 was the social event of the decade. It symbolized the ultimate union, the merging of ancient titles with limitless new capital. Even the Prince of Wales attended the wedding, signaling to the world that the Rothschilds were finally, truly, accepted. Under Hannah and Archibald, Mentmore entered its golden age. The house functioned as a political powerhouse, beneath Paxton's soaring glass roof, amidst the palm trees and marble statues. The future of the British Empire was discussed over champagne. The interior dazzled guests with what became known as Le Goût Rothschild, the Rothschild taste. It was an unapologetic display of gold, velvet, and Renaissance treasures. Yet, cracks were already forming beneath the surface. While Archibald truly loved Hannah, he was uncomfortable with the overwhelming opulence of the house. It clashed with his more restrained, aristocratic tastes. More ominously, the sheer scale of the estate required an army of 80 servants just to maintain basic operations. It was a machine that required constant fuel, both financial and emotional. Chapter 3. Frozen in Grief. The heartbeat of Mentmore stopped in November 1890. Hannah, the soul of the estate, contracted typhoid fever and died at the tragic age of 39. Her death devastated Archibald. He had achieved his life's goals, marrying the richest woman in England, winning the Derby, and eventually becoming Prime Minister. But without Hannah, the victory was hollow. In his profound grief, Archibald made a decision that would seal the mansion's fate for generations. He ordered that nothing in the house be changed. Hannah's rooms were sealed shut. Her unfinished letters remained on her desk. Her clothes hung in the wardrobes. The house was preserved exactly as she left it on the day she died. Mentmore transformed from a vibrant home into a mausoleum of memory. For decades, the house refused to move forward. As the world outside embraced electricity, automobiles, and modern plumbing, Mentmore remained stuck in the Victorian era. This refusal to modernize, while romantic, meant that the infrastructure of the house began to fail. By the time their son, Harry Primrose, took over, the cost of maintaining such a prehistoric beast was becoming crippling. 2 world wars and the slow decline of the British Empire further eroded the family's ability to keep the lights on. Chapter 4. The Sale of the Century. The fatal blow finally arrived in 1974 with the death of the 6th Earl. The estate passed to Neil Primrose, who was immediately hit with a staggering financial reality: inheritance tax. At the time, British tax laws were punishing, demanding up to 75% of an estate's value. Neil was faced with an impossible choice: sell the house or sell the contents. Desperate to save Mentmore as a complete entity, Neil offered the entire estate, the house, the grounds, and the priceless collection to the British government for a mere £2 million. In hindsight, it was a bargain of absurd proportions. Art historians and museum directors pleaded with the government to accept, arguing that Mentmore was a unique time capsule of decorative arts that could never be replaced. However, the government, plagued by economic recession and inflation, refused. They viewed the mansion not as national heritage, but as the extravagant toy of the rich. They declined the offer. The result was what the press called the sale of the century in 1977. For 10 days, the world watched as Mentmore was cannibalized. Sotheby's auctioneers moved in, and the treasures were sold off piece by piece. Furniture that had once belonged to Marie Antoinette, fireplaces designed by the painter Rubens, and porcelain from the royal courts of Europe were scattered to the winds. The auction raised over £6 million, triple what the family had asked the government to pay. But the victory was bitter. The house was stripped bare. The artwork that gave the rooms their meaning was gone, leaving behind only an empty, echoing stone shell. Chapter 5. A Modern Ghost. Since that great sale, Mentmore Towers has drifted through time like a ship without a rudder. It was briefly owned by the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the Beatles' spiritual guru, who intended to turn it into a meditation center. But the plan never fully materialized. In the 2000s, billionaire Simon Halabi purchased the property with dreams of converting it into the world's first 6-star hotel. It seemed like a savior had finally arrived. Restoration plans were drawn up, and scaffolding was erected. However, the 2008 financial crisis collapsed Halabi's real estate empire, and the restoration halted before it truly began. Ironically, in its decay, Mentmore found a new kind of fame. Hollywood directors realized that the mansion's brooding, empty Gothic architecture was the perfect backdrop for portraying isolation and lost grandeur. It became Wayne Manor in Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, a place burned to the ground by its owner's past. It was the setting for the mysterious masked ball in Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. In these films, Mentmore played itself, a beautiful, imposing, but fundamentally lonely place. Conclusion: the lesson of the empty hall. Today, Mentmore Towers is listed on the Heritage at Risk Register. The famous glass roof that once flooded the hall with sunshine now leaks water, rotting the floors below. The gardens, once manicured to perfection, are overgrown and wild. The silence is absolute. The tragedy of Mentmore is not just about the physical decay of a building, it is a testament to short-sightedness. The refusal of the government to save the estate in the 1970s is now viewed by historians as one of the greatest cultural blunders of the 20th century. By trying to save £2 million, the nation lost a collection and a context that can never be replicated. You see, a Marie Antoinette desk sitting in a museum is just a desk. But that same desk, sitting in a room designed for it, in a house built to hold it, tells the story of an era. Mentmore was a total work of art, a Gesamtkunstwerk. When the collection was sold, the art lost its home, and the home lost its soul. The mansion stands today as a warning. It reminds us that heritage is fragile. Money, titles, and stone walls are not enough to guarantee survival. Without the active will to preserve memory, even the greatest palaces will eventually return to the dust. And so, Mentmore waits in the English countryside. A ghost of the Victorian age, a shell of the Rothschild dream, hoping for a savior that may never come.